I paid my brother's rent for an entire year, and somehow he still called me greedy. But that wasn't even the worst part. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Lyra Hale. I'm a quiet, hard-working woman from Oregon, someone who was raised to believe that family comes first no matter what. My younger brother, Cole, has always struggled to take responsibility. When he lost his job last year, he called me in tears, saying he didn't want to lose his apartment. He promised it would only be for a few months, just until he found something steady. I didn't even think twice. I said yes immediately. He was my brother, and I had been looking out for him my whole life. At first, I felt good helping him. I worked extra hours at the veterinary clinic, skipped small comforts, and used my savings to support him. But months went by, and Cole didn't seem worried about finding real work. He acted like my support was guaranteed. When I tried to ask him about job applications, he snapped or brushed me off. After a year of paying every bill he had, I finally told him I couldn't keep doing it. My savings were almost gone. Instead of understanding, he exploded. He called me selfish, greedy, and said I was abandoning him. I was shocked. I had given up so much for him, and still he blamed me. That moment hurt more than anything else I had gone through that year. And even though I didn't know it yet, it was only the beginning of everything that would fall apart. My childhood shaped the way I saw my brother, and it shaped the way he saw me. When our father disappeared from our lives, it felt like the world dropped a weight on our small house. My mother, Marcy, had no choice but to work long hours just so we could keep the lights on. She left early and came back late, always exhausted, always trying to make everything seem normal. Because she was barely home, I learned to grow up fast. I was the one who packed Cole's lunches, made sure he finished his homework, and walked him to school. When he cried at night, I was the one who sat beside him until he fell asleep. I carried the responsibility that should have belonged to two parents. At the time, I didn't think about what it meant. I only knew that Cole needed someone, and I was there. As we got older, the roles never changed. Cole grew up knowing that someone would always step in for him. He didn't have to figure things out on his own because I had already made a habit of solving everything for him. If he forgot something, I fixed it. If he got into trouble, I talked him through it. If he made a mess of anything, I cleaned it up before anyone noticed. It became our silent pattern. He understood that I felt responsible for him, and he leaned on that more than I realized. He wasn't cruel, not at first. He simply learned that if he didn't try, I would pick up the slack. And I kept telling myself that this was what a good sister did, that family meant stepping in when things got hard. I didn't question it, not even when the weight felt unfair. I convinced myself it was love, even though it slowly became something else, something unbalanced, something he took for granted, and something I didn't know how to step away from. When Cole told me he couldn't manage his place anymore, his voice carried that familiar mix of worry and expectation. He didn't ask directly, he just let the fear sink into the spaces between his sentences, knowing I would step in. His place in Portland wasn't much: peeling paint, flickering hallway lights, and a landlord who didn't care about anything except the due date. Still, it was the only roof he had, and once again, I felt that old pull to protect him. So I took the lease payment onto my shoulders like it was just another chore. One month became another, and soon I found myself rearranging my entire life around his bills. The clinic picked up more weekend appointments, and I volunteered for nearly every one. Morning shifts, late shifts, anything that meant a little extra in my paycheck. My feet ached, my back stayed stiff, and I spent most lunches leaning against a wall just to breathe. Little by little, I trimmed pieces from my own life. I stopped grabbing food on the way home. I posted old furniture and clothes online, hoping to squeeze out a few extra dollars wherever I could. I opened my drawer one night and stared at the small envelope marked emergencies, the one I'd built slowly, dollar by dollar. My hand shook when I opened it, but I used it anyway. I felt guilty even hesitating, because Cole's needs had always been louder than my fears. Whenever I worried out loud, he brushed my concern aside with smooth promises. He'd smile, pat my shoulder, and swear everything would turn around soon. That reassurance worked on me longer than it should have. I wanted to trust him, to believe things would shift, that the next month would be different. I held on to those words because letting go of them felt like letting go of him, and I wasn't ready for that yet. As the weeks slid into months, the pattern around Cole became harder to ignore. He drifted from one short task to another, never staying with anything long enough to build stability. Whenever I tried to bring up the idea of finding something permanent, he reacted as if I were bothering him. He'd wave me away, glance at his phone, or mumble that I was pushing too hard. The tone stung more than the words. Slowly, his expectations widened. First it was small things, a few bags of food here and there. Then it grew into power bills, repair fees, and even payments tied to his vehicle. Each request landed as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I found myself pulling out my wallet before I even processed what he was asking for, because he made it sound like part of my routine. Any pause on my part brought out a practiced line from him. He'd sigh and remind me that he'd do the same for me if our situations were swapped. He made it sound like a promise, but something in me twisted whenever he said it. I tried to picture him stepping up for me the way I had stepped up for him, and no image came to mind. Every time I questioned why he wasn't trying harder, he acted offended, insisting I didn't understand how difficult everything felt for him. He painted himself as overwhelmed, unlucky, stuck in circumstances beyond his control. And because I'd been stepping in for him since we were kids, it was easier, almost automatic, to accept his excuses. Still, something in me began to crack. I noticed the way he relaxed whenever I offered to cover something, the way he never once asked how I was holding up. His comfort depended entirely on my effort, and he didn't seem bothered by that at all. That quiet realization settled in my chest, heavier each day, making me wonder when helping had turned into something so lopsided. Reaching the end of that year felt like hitting a wall I could no longer climb. My account balance had thinned to a level that made my chest tighten every time I checked it. I had pushed myself past every limit, telling myself it was temporary, telling myself he would eventually carry some of the weight. But nothing changed, and I knew I couldn't keep draining what little I had left. One evening, after another long shift, I sat across from him and finally said the words I'd been avoiding for far too long. I told him I needed to step back, that I had to take care of my own future before there was nothing left to protect. His reaction didn't come slowly, it burst out of him like a storm. He didn't look worried or embarrassed. He looked offended. His voice rose fast, sharp and angry, throwing accusations at me as if I had betrayed him. He called me names that made my stomach twist, words meant to cut, not to question. Hearing him label me in ways I never expected felt like someone had yanked the ground from under me. He insisted that I had some sort of lifelong duty to keep carrying him, that because I had been the one guiding him when we were younger, that role could never end. He twisted the past into an argument, turning all those old responsibilities into some strange debt I was supposed to keep paying. Listening to him rewrite our history like that made the air in the room feel colder. For a moment, I couldn't even speak. I just stared at him, trying to understand how he could look at everything I'd sacrificed and still believe I owed him more. That was when something inside me shifted. Not anger, just clarity. It was the first time I truly understood that all my effort, all my worry, all those long nights and early mornings had meant far less to him than I ever imagined. A few days passed in a heavy blur after that argument. I kept replaying his words, wondering how things had twisted so far. I didn't expect any answers, but they came anyway, just not from him. My mother called one afternoon, her voice carrying a hesitation that immediately set me on edge. She mentioned something she thought I already knew, something she assumed Cole had told me himself. She said he'd been given a chance at steady work months earlier. A reliable position at a warehouse, the kind of opportunity that could have given him structure and income without me stretching myself thin. It offered regular hours, insurance, and enough pay for him to manage his own place. I felt a strange mix of surprise and confusion, because he had never hinted at anything like that. When I asked why he hadn't taken it, my mother grew quiet before repeating what he'd told her. He'd brushed the offer aside because, in his words, he didn't need to worry about it. He had said, with complete confidence, that I would always handle things for him. Not help, not support, but cover, like my contribution was guaranteed, endless, unquestioned. Hearing that made something inside me crack open in a way it never had before. It wasn't just the missed opportunity, it was the certainty behind his assumption. He hadn't seen me as a sibling trying to help during a rough patch. He had seen me as a permanent solution, someone he could depend on without giving anything back. I wasn't a person in that picture. I was an option he felt entitled to use. The realization left me sitting in silence long after the call ended. All those long shifts, the things I'd given up, the nights I lay awake worrying, it suddenly looked different. It wasn't sacrifice to him. It wasn't kindness. It was simply expected. And that truth hit harder than anything he'd said during our fight. After learning the truth, something in me settled into a quiet resolve. I didn't feel the urge to argue or throw his lies back at him. I didn't want another shouting match or another round of excuses. I just felt tired, in a way that reached deeper than anything I'd known before. So instead of calling him out, I chose a different path, one that required no anger at all. I pulled back. Not dramatically, not with announcements or explanations. I simply stopped holding up the pieces he kept dropping. The next time a bill showed up with his name plastered on it, I left it where it belonged. When the reminder notices from his landlord started arriving, I didn't forward them, didn't mention them, didn't ask how he planned to handle anything. I kept my hands off every problem that wasn't mine. He called a few times, mostly about small expenses he expected me to handle without question. I kept my answers short, never rude, just distant enough that he couldn't lean on me. When his car started acting up, he hinted at the cost of getting it fixed, expecting me to jump in like I always had. I didn't offer. I listened, wished him luck, and moved on. It felt strange at first, like stepping out of a role I'd played my entire life. But the silence became easier. It wasn't about punishing him, it was about letting the world finally meet him without me standing in the way. He didn't notice at first. He still carried that same confidence, convinced that I'd eventually fold. He thought it was only a matter of time before I reached into my pocket again, before I cleaned up whatever mess came next. He had no idea that I was done saving him. And for the first time, I realized I didn't need to explain that to him. The consequences would speak louder than anything I could ever say. It didn't take long before the situation around his place began to crumble. One afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. The man on the line introduced himself as Grant Delson, the person responsible for managing the building where Cole lived. His tone was firm, not rude, but unmistakably tired. He explained that the payments for the unit hadn't been made for 3 straight months. That was the moment he realized the person handling those charges wasn't the actual tenant. I listened quietly while he went over the missed deadlines and the notices Cole had ignored. I wasn't surprised to hear the overdue amount was larger than I expected. Cole had assumed I'd eventually sweep in and clear everything like before, and because I hadn't, reality had caught up with him. What did shock me was what Grant told me next. He said complaints had been filed about loud gatherings, damaged walls, and broken fixtures, issues that happened while I was the one covering the rent. Hearing that made something twist inside me. All those nights I was working extra hours or skipping things I needed, he had been using the place like it was a playground rather than a home he was struggling to maintain. When Grant mentioned that Cole had blamed me for the debt, saying I had pulled support out of nowhere, something inside me cooled completely. That final attempt to shift responsibility told me everything I needed to know. I had given him every chance, and he had used each one carelessly. Grant said he was considering taking legal steps to recover what was owed. I didn't hesitate. I told him he had my full cooperation, that I would provide any information he needed. There was no hesitation left in me, no lingering instinct to shield Cole from the outcome. I had stepped in for him for far too long. Now, whatever happened next would be his to face, not mine. I was in the middle of cleaning a treatment room when I heard the front door slam hard enough to rattle the windows. The sudden noise made everyone look up. Then I saw him, Cole, marching toward me with a red face and a wild, frantic energy that made the whole clinic fall silent. Before I could even step aside, he started shouting my name, demanding that I fix everything and hand over whatever cash I had. His words echoed through the space, sharp and angry. He didn't care that clients were staring or that my coworkers looked alarmed. He pointed at me like I had betrayed him on purpose, insisting I had destroyed his stability by walking away right when he needed me most. He acted like I had pulled some cruel trick instead of simply stepping back from a responsibility that never belonged to me. He kept repeating the same accusation, louder each time, claiming I had ruined his life. I felt every eye in the clinic on me, but instead of shrinking like I usually did, I felt something steady rise in my chest. For once, the fear and guilt weren't there anymore. I waited for him to stop long enough to hear me, and when he did, I spoke quietly, not matching his anger. I told him he hadn't leaned on me out of need, but out of convenience. I told him he had taken the easiest path because he knew I wouldn't push back. And then I said the words I should have said years ago: he was grown, responsible for himself, and I wasn't a source he could tap whenever he ran out of options. The room stayed still after that, as if everyone was holding their breath. Cole stared at me with pure disbelief, then his expression twisted into something colder. He spat out a threat that he'd cut me off entirely, like it was supposed to frighten me back into place. Then he turned and stormed out, leaving a trail of tension behind him. For the first time, his anger didn't shake me. It only confirmed what I already knew: I wasn't going back to the person he expected me to be. Once I stepped back completely, the consequences hit hard and fast. Without my support, Cole couldn't keep up with the rent. Notices piled up, and soon he was forced to leave the apartment he had once taken for granted. I didn't intervene or make calls on his behalf. I let the situation unfold exactly as it needed to. His first attempt to find a safety net was our mother. He knocked on her door, suitcase in hand, expecting the familiar comfort he had relied on for years. But Marcy was firm. She told him she would no longer bail him out, that she wasn't going to enable the same patterns he had established with me. Her words were clear and final. Next, he reached out to friends, thinking someone would always step in. One by one, doors closed. Many of them had grown tired of lending him money or making excuses for his choices. The connections he had assumed were reliable dissolved under the weight of his own behavior. Cole moved from one couch to another, staying nights here and there wherever he could find a spot. When that failed, he booked cheap motels, often arriving exhausted and frustrated, realizing too late that stability had vanished from his life. For the first time, the illusion of constant rescue faded. I watched from a distance, knowing I was no longer part of the cycle that had kept him afloat. He had assumed I would step in as always, but now he faced the reality he had ignored for so long. The comfort and safety he counted on depended entirely on others, and without me, that world collapsed. It was a quiet kind of reckoning. No shouting, no confrontation, just the slow understanding that he was on his own, and he would need to confront the consequences of choices he had made while I finally focused on my own life. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure what to expect from my mother. I braced myself for criticism, for the familiar guilt that always followed whenever family tension flared. I imagined her shaking her head, telling me I had overreacted, or worse, blaming me for not doing more. Instead, she surprised me. Marcy's voice was soft but firm, carrying a weight of honesty I hadn't heard before. She admitted she had watched Cole rely on me for far too long and had regretted not stepping in sooner to teach him responsibility. Her words weren't filled with judgment, they were filled with understanding, acknowledgement, and an unspoken apology for the years I had carried alone. She told me she had seen how much I had sacrificed, how I had quietly handled burdens that were never mine to bear. For the first time, she validated the struggles I had tried to hide, and it felt like a heavy stone lifting from my chest. I realized then that I wasn't being blamed for the situation, nor was I being scolded for protecting myself. My mother's support was steady, calm, and unwavering. She wasn't just siding with me out of obligation, she truly saw everything I had done and understood why I had reached my limit. Hearing her acknowledge my efforts changed something inside me. The fear of judgment that had haunted me for years began to fade. I felt recognized, truly seen, and for the first time, I didn't have to justify my choices or apologize for putting myself first. That quiet moment of validation gave me a new sense of strength. It was a turning point, proof that I wasn't alone, that my sacrifices had meaning, and that finally, someone understood the difficult balance I had struggled to maintain. It was a relief I hadn't known I needed, and it reshaped the way I viewed both my brother and myself. Several months later, my phone rang one evening with a number I didn't immediately recognize. When I answered, a familiar voice spoke, but it sounded different, strained, quiet, and careful. It was Cole. There was no anger in his tone this time, no frantic demands, just a weariness I hadn't heard before. He explained that he had finally started working at a lumber yard. The hours were long, the work hard, and the pay steady. I could hear the fatigue in his voice, the kind that comes from learning lessons the hard way. He spoke slowly, as if weighing every word, and then he said something I wasn't sure he had ever managed before. He apologized. It wasn't a casual or forced apology, it shook through his voice, faltering in the middle, raw and unpolished. He admitted that he had treated me like someone who would always catch him, someone whose support was a guarantee rather than a choice. He finally recognized that I wasn't his safety net, that I had a life separate from his mistakes. I listened quietly, feeling a strange mix of relief and distance. I didn't scold him, didn't lecture, didn't demand restitution. I had already stepped back months ago, allowing him to face the consequences of the choices he had made. Life had done what I couldn't, it had made him responsible. When he finished speaking, I told him simply that I hurt him. No celebrations, no promises of resuming our old patterns, just acknowledgement. In that moment, I felt a sense of closure. I had acted out of love for years, but now I had acted out of respect for both of us. Hanging up, I realized that sometimes the strongest lessons aren't taught with anger or punishment. They are taught by letting go, by stepping aside, and allowing someone to finally confront the results of their own actions. And for the first time in a long while, I felt completely at peace. Looking back, I realize how much I had carried for Cole over the years. I forgave him, not because he deserved it immediately, but because holding on to resentment only weighed me down. That forgiveness didn't mean returning to old patterns or allowing him to rely on me financially ever again. I drew a line and respected it, protecting both myself and the life I had worked so hard to reclaim. Rebuilding my savings and reclaiming my independence became a quiet triumph. I focused on myself in ways I hadn't allowed before, enjoying the small freedoms I had once overlooked. There was peace in knowing that I could finally breathe without the constant worry of rescuing someone who refused to stand on their own. The experience taught me a lesson I hope others can understand. Family isn't measured by endless sacrifices or by always bending to another person's needs. True family is rooted in respect, respect for each other's choices, respect for boundaries, and respect for the effort each person puts into their own life. It's a balance I had never fully grasped until this situation forced me to. Sometimes the most powerful form of justice isn't confrontation or retaliation. Sometimes it's simply stepping back, allowing consequences to unfold naturally, and letting someone finally meet the reality their actions have created. Watching Cole navigate the challenges he had avoided for so long reinforced that truth. Now, I live with clarity and confidence, knowing I can care deeply without losing myself. I've learned to protect my energy and my resources while still loving my family in a healthy way. And I know that letting someone face the life they shaped is sometimes the strongest gift you can give yourself, and the only way to teach someone the value of responsibility. Hey besties! Thanks so much for sticking with me through this story. Life can test us in ways we never expect, helping family only to realize they took our kindness for granted, feeling betrayed, and learning to protect ourselves. Lyra's journey shows that setting boundaries doesn't mean you stop caring, it means valuing yourself. If this story touched you, don't forget to like, share, drop a comment, and subscribe for more. See you in the next one. Bye.